Welcome back to Awakening in Health, and I am back with Dr. Karen Benn this morning. My name is Dennis, and Dr. Benn has got a wealth of experience in environmental science. This is part 2 of discussion. For some people, they will have heard this last week, and we are continuing a chat about busting a lot of myths in relation to a few things that we're hearing that really are very terrifying for a lot of people, and we want to kind of dispel a lot of those fears. We dove heavily into the fallacy that carbon dioxide is damaging the planet. We're going to elaborate on that some more. We talked about some fallacies around pollution and about this narrative that the Earth is in peril of kind of blowing up imminently because of carbon dioxide. And we also discussed Karen's journey as qualified in multiple areas to a very, very high degree, even how she started on her journey of believing the propaganda that is still being pushed in schools and universities, and how, due to her research herself and just I guess having lots of experience in different areas of science, how she was able to pry apart that narrative. And essentially now she describes herself as having been brainwashed and coming out of that. So again, welcome this morning again, Karen. And let's just pick it up from there.
Okay, great. Thank you. So a great place to start today is on the fallacy that there are too many people. And the only way to really get that into context is to look at all life on Earth in terms of its mass. Okay, because when you get to see all the life broken down into each group of life, like let's say plants alone, what mass they make, and then each of the other groups, and then you start looking at humans, which is a subset of mammals. Okay, so you're going to be so shocked at how few there are of us in terms of mass.
You went through this with me before, and I was actually, I don't know a fair bit about this stuff, but even I was left fairly astonished. And just to put that little caveat in there, we're not saying that big industries, these horrible polluting enterprises, we're not saying that they don't exist. And again, we run into these problems where the people who are trying to keep us in fear, to tax us, conflate all these things together. So we're prying open different parts of this discussion to have a better understanding and a better context. So yeah, let's go there. We're talking about this biomass. Biomass is easy, isn't it? It just means biological mass.
Yes, that's right.
How much of something is there?
That's
and
right.
we're going to try and put that into a comparison of one thing against another.
Yes. So I am going to, I'll just set the scene so you know how it's been done. And then Dennis has also got some slides for anyone who wants to have a look at the diagrams, which I'm a very visual thinker, so I prefer the representations myself
Sure.
as well. But when I tell you the figures of each of the groups, that's all you need to look at, is the comparison from one group to another, and then finally there'll be us. Okay.
And people can get those slides if they contact me, DENNIS @awakeninginhealth.com, or I'll be posting a video, and I'm going to try and coordinate those slides with Dr. Benn as she's speaking. We'll see how good I go. So yeah, off you go, Karen.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. So the biomass on Earth is measured in gigatons of carbon. And that makes sense because every living thing on this planet is made with carbon at the base. Without carbon, there would be no life on Earth. There's nothing on this planet that's alive that doesn't have carbon in it. So it's a good way to measure it in terms of mass. So I'm going to read out some groups of living things. They're called taxa or taxon. That's just a Greek word for group. The mass is measured in gigatons of carbon. Now, don't worry about gigatons. It's way more than the average brain can imagine. But it is 1 million metric tons of carbon. And when you look at the visuals, you'll get a sense of what each of those cubes of these different animals and plants and bacteria represent. It's a visual, okay? But I will read out the number for the gigaton of carbon and the percentage that it represents in terms of all the biomass on the whole planet. Okay, so I'm going to start with plants. The gigatons of carbon, or let's just say the mass in gigatons of plants, is 450 gigatons.
Now, that was the carbon in the plants, isn't
That's
it?
right.
So we're referring specifically to carbon during this discussion.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
It has to be that way to be able to make the comparison simpler and real,
Yeah.
viable, because you can't do it on size.
Yes.
You know, some cells are bigger than others.
That's right. A bird can float, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Now, 450 gigatons of plants makes up 82.4% of the biomass of life on Earth. Okay?
So less than 20% of all the other living stuff is not accounted for. Plants are making up a massive amount there.
Yes. Yeah, and just as well, because without them, forget the rest.
Yeah.
Next is bacteria. And bacteria make up 70 gigatons of carbon. And that percentage, the next highest percentage, is 12.8%. Now, if we only took plants and bacteria, we've already got over 96%.
So with just those two groups of living things, plants and bacteria, how much did you say we got they're making up?
It's over, no, it's almost 96%.
96%. So all the rest of every single living thing combined, we've only got 4% left.
Yes. All right. So just try to take that in, right? Just try to imagine that.
And you haven't even come close to humans yet.
Not even touch the sides of humans yet.
Okay.
Humans fit into one group that then we'll see that broken down into other groups as well. So the next biggest group, so we've got plants, then bacteria. Number 3 is fungi. And that's a mass of 12 gigatons, but it's 2.2% of the biomass of life on Earth.
So you said 96 before. That meant there was 4% left. And out of that 4%, there's more than half of that's gone wiped away already, again, with just fungus. Am I right?
That's right.
How much do we have left?
We have about 2.5% left for the rest.
For the rest of every living thing, we've got 2.5% left.
Roughly 2.5.
Off we go.
Okay. So next is something called archaea, which is a particular kind of group of organisms that have existed the longest on Earth, and they're a little bit unusual. They include things like aquatic invertebrates and
Would they include spiders and things like that as
jellyfish, sea anemones. Yeah. So archaea. Yeah. So it's it's an ancient group. They are different to bacteria. That's why they're kept separate from bacteria. They function differently. They can be anaerobic and as well as different. But that group, that makes up a mass of 7 gigatons, and that equates to 1.3%.
We're running out of space here, aren't we?
We're running out of space. We haven't even got to animals yet. We haven't even touched animals yet. All right. So next is the protists. Protists are little micro... you can see them under a microscope in water. They're little organisms that have ways of being mobile by...
wiggling little filaments.
They've got filaments that work like little legs that help them swim. And they make up 0.7%, right? Because that's 4 gigatons of carbon is the protists. And that fits with, a quarter of all life is in water. Now, we come to animals. We've come to animals. And the animals make up a mass of 2.59 gigatons of carbon on Earth. That's every animal. Every animal you can see.
Birds, fish, mammals.
Yes. Flatworms.
Insects.
Insects, beetles, mosquitoes. What else have we got? We're coming to the animal
reptiles,
sex.
Yeah.
Reptiles. That's fish, arthropods, annelids, mollusks, nematodes, wild mammals, wild birds, and all the arthropods. Like that. That's all. The arthropods are both land and sea or marine, and they were around for a lot longer. So there's many of them.
So how much of a percentage of that whole group are we looking at out of the total biomass?
For animals,
Yeah.
for total biomass, 0.47%.
0.4. That's less than 0.5%.
That's right.
That's all mammals in existence are less than 0.5%.
No, not mammals.
So
animals.
My apologies.
All
wow,
animals.
that is quite incredible.
Anything called an animal.
Yeah. Okay.
Which means you're not a microbe,
yeah.
and you're not a plant, and you're not fungi.
So let's break that down.
Right. So there's just one other little group there that gets a mention, and I will mention it because it's the last tiny bit of percentage, and it's 0.2 mass in gigatons of carbon, and it's viruses, and the percentage is 0.04%. Okay, so that's the main groups of all life on Earth. They're divided into those groups. Okay, all life on Earth is divided into those 7 groups of life. Now we're going to break down the animals. Okay, just the animals. So the first group of animals that's the largest is the arthropods, the marine arthropods, like crabs and
anything with legs
yes,
that
that's
runs
right.
around the bottom. Your lobsters.
Yeah, the things
and
that look like insects that belong in the sea, because that's where the insects evolved from. So that makes up 1 gigaton of carbon, but its biomass as a percentage of animals is 38.6%. That one group makes up 38.6% of all the animals.
Which is massive.
For the animals.
Close to half, isn't it?
Yeah, we're way down the bottom of this list.
Yeah.
Next is fish, which is 0.7 gigatons of carbon, and that's 27% of the biomass of animals. So just animals.
So out of that 0.5%, already we've just wiped out most of that 0.5%, haven't we?
Yeah. So over half of all the animals on Earth are marine arthropods or fish. Over half.
Yeah. Next
group is the terrestrial arthropods. That's all your insects.
Yeah.
And spiders and stuff like that. That's 0.2 of a gigaton of carbon, and that makes up 7.7% of the animals.
Of insects on Earth, aren't they?
Oh my God,
yeah.
There's huge, hell of a lot more insects than there are us. And the next is annelids. They're the segmented worms, and the segmented worms make up 0.2 gigatons of carbon.
There's more of them than us
7.7%.
on the Earth.
The 7 So there's 3 groups that are 7.7% that come after your marine arthropods and your fish. Then when you get down to these next 3 groups, which is the terrestrial arthropods, the segmented worms, and the mollusks, they're all only 0.2 gigatons of carbon, and they're each 7.7%.
What have we got left?
Right, we've got about 10, let's say 12% left.
12%.
12% of the animals.
Yes.
Of the animals, right? So then the next, now there is a reason why they've done it like this. They've put what's called livestock. That's all the animals we breed or have. We either own them, breed them for food or pets or the zoo or but livestock.
We're supposedly interfering with nature with these.
Basically, yeah. So the livestock represents 0.1 gigatons of carbon, and that's 3.9% of the biomass of all animals on Earth.
3.9.
So don't worry about their farts, okay? Yeah. Please don't worry about their farts. Don't even worry about ours either. Next is the fancy name for a bunch of aquatic invertebrates called Cnidarians, which are pretty ancient, pretty small, and that's 0.1 of a gigaton of carbon, and again, that's 3.9%. So there's plenty of things that make up next. But hey, we've just got to the humans, and there are a couple of things left after humans that are at slightly less percentage than us. But humans make up 0.06 gigatons of carbon, and that's 2.3% of the animals. Humans are 2.3% of the animals, and I just want to remind you that animals are 0.47% of all life on Earth. So we are 2.3% of 0.47%. Okay, and I'll come back to, I'll put that in context later when I finish the group.
It's almost too incredible to
Exactly.
to imagine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So after that, there's two more groups. The wild mammals. The wild mammals are 0.007%. 0.007 gigatons of carbon, which is 0.3% of all the biomass of animals. And the wild birds, which is 0.002 gigatons of carbon and makes up 0.1% of the biomass of all animals on Earth. Now, I think the part to draw from this is this particular ratio or statistic. So the ratio, first of all, people will want to know this because people ask me this. What's the ratio of humans to livestock? So the ratio of humans to livestock is 1 to 3. In other words, for every human, there are 3 livestock. I think there are humans who think there are many, many, many more livestock than that, but it isn't. It's 1 to 3 livestock. The percentage of humans as a biomass of all the life on Earth, not just all the animals, but all the life on Earth, is 0.03%, which is a bit like carbon. You know, we had the discussion about carbon.
Yeah.
You know how
carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
That's right.
So
which is 0.04. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I did make a mistake. It's the livestock is 0.03% of all the biomass on Earth. Humans is 0.01% of all the life on the planet. Now, I just want to, there'll be people who'll be just, their minds will be thinking, oh, you know, God, what? I don't get it, and it just sounds bizarre. So I just need to remind all of us humans, because we forget this, we see the world through our eyes, and through our eyes, what we notice are, first of all, the things that are visible and the things that are biggish. We have eyes that look for things that are relevant to us. Our pets, what we eat, the birds, that's how we see the world. So there's a lot of the world we never see. We never see because it's invisible, because it's small or underground or in the atmosphere. So it's only natural that it seems true that there are more people than anything, because who do we notice the most? People. We're interested in people.
Even more than that, we're also attracted, we gravitate towards the cities and the villages and the houses and the places where we congregate, because we're social. But there's vast swathes of Earth where there are no people whatsoever.
And not even animals, like in the Antarctic and the Arctic. So we'll just leave that there. But now I'd like to segue into the propaganda. And the propaganda is there's too many people on Earth. Way too many people on Earth. So there's two sets of propaganda. One is that they keep telling us what the futuristic numbers are based on not today's figures, yesterday's figures of breeding. And that's all changed dramatically. And there is a person I'll mention that's really worth seeing his videos, because he puts it all into perspective, plus he makes it very funny. It's really entertaining how he does it. Very clever man. He's passed away, but his name was Professor Hans Rosling. And I'll send you a video on that that people will have fun with, okay? But we've actually got negative population growth in almost every part of the world. Yep. So it always amuses me that in Italy, where they have the Vatican, who's telling everyone to breed,
Yeah.
supposedly, maybe not this one though, Italy has negative population growth that's serious. It's quite low. It can't replace its population. The population of Italians is decreasing. And there's only a couple of places where the population's still producing more than replacement, and Thailand is parts of Asia, but Thailand's kind of the one big place left where they actually, on average, produce an average of 3.4 children. We don't even produce a replacement number of
When you say we, you mean Australians?
Australians,
Yeah.
and I don't mean to be racist when I say this, but I'd say that overall the white peoples of the planet are not reproducing their own numbers. So, you couple that with what's gone on in the last 3 years, where if you've been looking at the statistics, we've had a huge loss of population already from the effects of the vaccines. So we've already lost a lot, worse than in World War II already, much worse. And that sets the population back, plus the ones breeding in the future, that sets that back. But even before that, even if you don't count that in, we are breeding less. People are having, to replace a population, you must have a minimum of 2.2 people per couple. 2.2 people
and that accounts for things like accidents or diseases or illness and whatnot.
Yes.
And just while you're on that little segue, the thing that really, it's just a bit of a disaster is this link that I'm seeing in a number of different medical papers now of the fertility rates, which are dropping drastically. That was happening before COVID, as we know, because of all the poisons and maybe and the different pollutions in our environment. But it seems that there's a strong correlation between these vaccines and lower fertility also as well.
That is a definite. I can say, hand on heart, or, shoot me if I'm wrong.
You can back it up with absolute firm data and evidence.
I've collected a lot of information about the vaccines. It is no surprise whatsoever. It was highly predictable. And because the spike proteins attached to the ACE2 receptors on every cell, the majority of ACE2 receptors in the human body are in our reproductive organs. And I think that we evolved that way so that if anything happened to the baby, it would self-abort. And of course, we've seen now the miscarriage rates 287% higher than the year before people took the vaccines.
And which demographic was that, do you know offhand? The nearly 300%, was that in the UK or America, or was that Australia? America.
Yeah, it was America, and it fits with the UK as well. But America, because I think the push to get pregnant women to have the vaccine was perhaps higher in America than in England.
That's what I understand.
Although a lot of people were terrified into taking the vaccine for that purpose. So we're in a bit of strife. We are never going to hit the 9 billion, not in the next few lifetimes of people on Earth. They talk about we're about to hit 9 billion. We were 8 billion at the beginning of COVID, and I've already heard various experts recalibrate, or they're talking the world's population. They're saying 7.5 billion. Now, I will not put my hand on my heart about that. I was just shocked when I started hearing scientific level or from hospital reports, etc. Of because they place it in terms of world population. They were saying 7.5, and I'm thinking, so what's happened? Anyway, we'll leave that. We'll park that. What I wanted to do is draw a picture in your mind for how few of us there are when it looks to us visually as if there's a lot. So if we had 9 billion people and each of them had 1,000 square meters to live on.
1,000 square meters is a lot. Give us some context. That's an average. Well, that's actually quite a. Actually, yeah, is that the average block size in Australia?
That's a big block.
That's a big block, isn't it?
It's a very comfortable block where you've got a big backyard and front yard.
Your standard suburban is now down to about 500 square, 300 to 500. So it's about a double-sized block in modern day terms, isn't it?
Block, yeah. So that'd be if you wanted to have some animals and some plants and trees and everything else. Now, if the 9 billion people each, not family, each had 1,000 square meters to live on.
So again, that's really important. I never thought about that when I was doing these figures before, different figures. But if you got a family of 5, that means that you have the equivalent of 5,000 square meters.
Yes.
So large families, you're talking hectares or nearly acres. Sorry.
This calculation was done on if there are 9. They keep talking about there's going to be 9 billion, which I certainly won't see in my lifetime, and I don't think anyone alive today will. We'll be lucky if we ever get to that number in the future, seriously, because the die-off from the vaccine injuries are prolonged. If you could have myocarditis and die tomorrow, or you could have myocarditis and die in 2 years. Then there's all the other things that complicate that as well. So we're looking at a die-off from this vaccine event that will go on for the entire lifetime of anyone who took the vaccine. Please don't think I'm telling you will die. I'm not. But of the people who took the vaccine, there will be all kinds of damage done that you'll either live through and accommodate, or it'll also potentially accumulate and kind of, it will shorten your life.
And the thing that I get concerned about as well is that if something happens, let's say somebody's had two jabs and they get incredibly sick 5 years later, they're never going to equate that from
not
this
if
poison
they're brainwashed by the media.
that has been put in their body 5 years prior, and they will just blame genetics.
Yes.
Or they'll just blame, I don't know, pollution, poison, whatever it is, or it was an accident, or it was from God. So that's such a devious attack on humanity.
But I can say though, because there were 2 things I was interested in when I was studying this. I know we're getting a little bit off track about human population and how it's not as bad as they tell you, and I will finish that bit. It's not long to go. However, when I first started researching the vaccine, first of all, the disease they talked about, I heavily researched that, and then the vaccine and the making of it, which has quite a history that goes back to the 90s. But what I'd found, as a researcher, you've got to have a scaffold to hang your hat on to compare something to. So the scaffold for me was the flu and the flu vaccine. So before COVID, the vaccine that caused the most deaths, even though it was nowhere near as high a percentage rate as the COVID vaccines, was the flu vaccine. So flu vaccine killed more people than any other vaccine overall before the COVID vaccine. And it was mostly because everybody took them, babies, old people, young people, lots of people had the flu vaccine. When I did my research on the flu vaccine, there were a lot of research papers done on a cumulative effect over time. So there is a pattern. If you had a flu vaccine, you would have an immediate or not reaction. Then there'd be a complicating factor later, and they were tracking that. They were studying so many people. They saw the patterns of what happens to people if they have the flu vaccine over their lifetime. And just one example that I will never forget from one paper was a gentleman who went in with no immediate effects. Then in the 3 to 5 year mark, he had some effects with loss of action in an arm and problems with some organs. And in the 5 to 8 year period, by then, his retina had popped off his eyes, which made him blind. He became paralysed in 3 parts of his body. But it was tracked in a very large cohort to the effects, the accumulative effects of the damage of a flu vaccine. That's before they were mRNA. So I'm thinking, I'll be looking in my lifetime to see the effects amongst the people I know who've had the vaccine as it may accumulate in them.
Yeah, I think you're right. What we'll do is we'll take a short break here and then we'll get right back into it. You're listening to Dr. Karen Benn, who is an extensive researcher, an academic, somebody who really is well qualified to be talking about the things we're talking about. We started talking about climate change and world population and things like carbon dioxide, and we're breaking a few myths down here, and we're going to get back into it after the break. Welcome back to Awakening in Health, and this morning we are talking to Dr. Karen Benn, who is a very avid researcher whose main areas have been around environmental science. And just before the break we left off talking about biomass and the significance or the insignificance, I guess, of humans in relation to that whole group of animals. Karen, let's pick it back up from there.
Yep. Okay. So there's one little cameo left, and that is if we reached 9 billion people, which I very much...
Just before the break, you made a very strong case for the fact that that's not going to happen.
No, that's right. Thank you. So if we gave each and every person out of the 9 billion people 1,000 square metres to live on, they would all fit into Brazil. Another statistic to keep in mind is if each family of 4 people lived on an area of 400 square metres, they would all fit into Iran. So, and listen, people, get out your iPhones. Everybody's carrying them these days. And go onto Google Maps and look how big or how small Iran is in relation to the whole population. Every single family with 400 meters, a family of 4, would all fit in Iran. And I remember hearing that years ago about when the population was closer to around 3.5 to 4 billion, about how every person could stand side by side in the Isle of Wight. And I actually broke down the figures on that, and it was actually a real statistic. So I'm aware of that. It's quite incredible when you can put things into those kind of perspectives. But I want to take it in another direction. So the obviously the biomass of people is almost insignificant. But I remember growing up, we talked in part 1, and I encourage people to go back and listen to that. But we talked about the terror that the organizations are always trying to put on us. They're trying to make us scared of everything. And when I was growing up in school, it was acid rain. We were going to be destroyed with acid. Cars were going to melt. We were going to have steel umbrellas by the years 2000. And then before that, we were talking about ice ages pending. And now we have something called global boiling. And the climate is broken. They're parodies almost. Yes. So I know I want to talk about something called the Milankovitch cycle. Okay, yes. Yep.
What is that?
All right, there was this wonderful Serbian man, Ivan Milankovic. You'll see his spelling of his name either at the end with O-V-I-C, which is how the Serbians spell it, or O-V-I-T-C-H, which is how the Russians spell it. But this particular man studied all the cycles. So he was the first to nail that we had regular ice ages kind of every 100,000 years.
So ice ages periodically happen.
And then there are other cycles that occur. And I'm not going to get very technical here because there are some very good videos that will make this much easier to picture in your brain to see where the 4 fit. But we have various things that affect the climate on Earth in regular cycles. And it's to do with the movement of Earth, not only around the sun, but the influence of the planet Jupiter, our moon, and when we are travelling through the galaxy as well. So Milankovitch studied all the 4 cycles and put them together.
So it seems to be what you're saying is that 0.04% of a substance that is vital for all human life maybe doesn't have anything to do with climate change, but this massive ball of fire that we see in the sky that can heat up the whole world when it's daylight and it all cools down when it's not. You're actually saying that thing in the sky might have something to do with the thing that warms the earth, might have something to do with the earth being warm and cold.
That thing, it's no wonder.
It's called the sun, by the way.
Yeah, that thing, the sun, no wonder the Egyptians, who were extremely intelligent, because they had time to be, and had very, very long civilization, realised or thought that the sun was like a god. The sun's the source of life. The sun is the source of a whole lot of effects on the planet, and I can't even go into them all today. But climate is not the weather. Climate is an amalgamation of forces and influences. And, beware anyone who calls themselves a climate scientist. Here's a good question to ask them. What is the role that clouds play? Because nobody's answered that question sufficiently for it to be ticked off.
So what is the role that clouds play?
Well, we can't prove it. We can theorise about it. We can talk about the blanketing effect, the deflection effect, the trapping, but
so
even
nobody's conclusively proved.
There's models, no proof.
It's all modelling.
It's not proved. It's not proven to the point like we can say that's the speed of light. All right, you can't
There's
say
no
that about
empirical
clouds.
fixed data to say that the clouds do anything either for or against the narrative.
You'll read lots of papers and they all have different views.
They're hypothetical.
Hypothetical. Now, it doesn't mean those papers are wrong. It's just that hasn't been fully ticked off. So I would never, even though I've looked into climate more than any of my own colleagues ever who call themselves climate scientists, because do you know why they do? Because they say, we've got climate change problem and it's caused by humans. That's their science. Unsubstantiated. Don't even read things. They won't read things that are outside of their field. But even though I read, I am very clear. I wouldn't dare or dream of calling myself a climate scientist because it is a very complicated puzzle. However, in one sense, it's super simple in that let's just leave it with the sun, because the other cycles are our elliptical orbit and how that changes and wobbles, the tilt of the earth, which leads to a thing called precession that changes over a period of time as well.
And precession, just for anybody who is interested, is it's almost like the spinning top just before it's about to fall over. It goes on a wobble even that's around in an orbit, if people can picture that.
Yep. So there are these unique aspects about our planet and where it is in the solar system, and then how there are, the effect of Jupiter, which nobody tells you about. Jupiter, there's an effect between Jupiter and the moon that cause what's now is called the lunar nodal cycle, which if you follow that, you know when it's going to flood, when the earthquakes are more likely to happen, volcanoes are more likely to explode, because the Earth is not a perfect sphere. It's like a football. It's not perfectly like a football, obviously, but it's a shorter distance from each pole to the centre of the Earth than it is around the equator.
Okay.
And that's because of the spin. So, if you've ever spun something that's not 100% solid, I know we think of the Earth as 100% solid, but it does have molten aspects to it, and it is pliable. It's I know it's very difficult to be, say, holding something like a bottle and think, oh, I can change its shape. But you can if you try. So it's fatter at the equator. And that makes a difference too to how the effects of climate and weather, etc. So Milankovitch did the studies, looked at all the patterns, put them all together. And as a consequence, he became the first person to accurately note when future ice ages would occur. By the way, we are in one at the moment. We're at the beginning of another one now. I know people wouldn't imagine it from what you're told, but we are. And the previous ice ages. And he's also, it accounts for what's called regular solar minimums and solar maximums. And why that's worth learning about is we've started a solar minimum around about the year 2019, 2020.
And more than that, that was information that has been predicted and has been documented well for decades upon decades, even up till the century before last, with people like Maunder and a few other observers.
He didn't predict them. He noted them in relation to sunspot activity.
Gotcha.
So the Maunder minimum, which was very serious, was around about 1645 to 1715 when it was at its coldest. So there's the little descent into the cold and then the ascent coming back out of it. And the Maunder minimum was only one of recent minimums, which are basically like little ice ages. In fact, others have been called little ice age. We've also had maximums. So during the Roman period, there was the Roman warming, which actually accounts for the reason that the Vandals and the Visigoths took over Rome. That was all because of them. Because the Vandals and the Visigoths came from parts of the planet that went underwater a little bit because they were already below sea level, like Holland and Belgium and those places. So those people went on the move. And that's when we had a big mass movement of humans that were like refugees at the time.
And there's two things there, because even back in that early to late 1700, even up till, from what I remember, the 1800s, the big river through the middle of London, I mean, that was frozen.
Yes,
and it didn't thaw out.
No.
It was frozen all year round, where they had even markets on the Thames, and this is easy to see.
The ice fairs, yeah.
There was vineyards in England.
That's right.
There were
Vine
farms.
Street.
That's right.
Vine Street in London.
That's right.
It never grew a vine before that,
Yep.
and then they could grow grapes.
Greenland was called Greenland for a reason. It had farms,
Yes.
green farms.
Well, that's when people went to Greenland.
Yeah.
Was during the medieval warming.
So, and to put that into context, we hear this rubbish about the hottest temperature on record continually, and even just that one piece of information, Greenland is now white. It's covered in snow.
It's very cold, and it's going to get
colder.
colder.
Very cold, but it was green. So how can anybody substantiate that we have got the hottest temperatures on record? The last show we did, you talked about the temperature of the Earth being 14 degrees hotter than it is currently, and life was thriving. So we do go through these cycles. So, okay.
So I just correct
please.
that a little bit. It's been 14 degrees warmer at the beginning of life on Earth, the Cambrian period, but still microscopic. But during the Triassic and the Jurassic, which was a little bit later, around about the 300 million years ago, it averaged. It got up to 12. It went down a bit, went up and down during it spans quite a long period. But the average temperature was between overall 8 to 12 degrees during that whole period, warmer than it is now.
Okay, and life was thriving.
Oh, the biggest biomass we've ever had on the planet, and where a lot of our coal, gas and oil came from. It was created during that period.
Okay, so and you are categorically stating, and again, it's not just yourself, and I've seen copious amounts of information to actually validate what you're saying, but I say this more for context in relation to who's listening. You are absolutely categorical that we are now at the beginning of another cold cycle.
Yes, like the Maunder minimum.
A mini ice age.
Yes.
And what's the predictions from some people as to when that might start to kick in?
All right, so the number one expert in the world on this, who nobody questions from the scientific arena, and I mean nobody, not even all the...
Maybe because she knows what she's talking about.
She can prove it. She can prove it. She's got the data. She's an astro-mathematician. Her name is Professor Valentina Zarkova, and she works at the University of Northumbria. She's a Ukrainian lady. And I will send you a copy of the video where she presents to the Global Warming Policy Unit in London, all men by the way, who write global warming policy, and not one of them tries to put a hole in her work. It's absolutely
Precise.
It's so precise, and it's all based. She's got all the evidence there. So she was the first to predict when this would start, and it's all related to sunspot activity. Now, you'd think, well, big deal. What's the big deal about sunspots? So, to answer your question, 2019, 2020. So the presentation was made in 2018. She predicted it to start in 2019, 2020.
And when could we see significant cooling temperatures?
2030.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I gather with some other people who to me I would suggest they were experts, it seems we do have these dramatic swings in temperature prior to these I guess cold snaps kicking in, and that would really explain these bounces, these swings that we are seeing. So in other words, we are having these very, very hot episodes in some places, but also I seem to remember
unusual places too.
Absolutely.
And we have got snow on Mykonos, one of the Greek islands.
And in the Sahara Desert. That's right. And New York, I think either last year or the year before, or even 2 consecutive years, had the coldest winters on record. So we have to take all these things into account. These things are being very, very conveniently ignored.
Well,
the ice caps are increasing.
No. Sorry. Beg your pardon. The ice caps have been increasing for a long time.
That's right.
Antarctica's the mass is really huge, the accretion. It's, in fact, that'll probably mean that anyone in Tasmania is going to have a very hard time during this minimum. Dennis and I, who are talking to each other right now, we live up in northern Queensland, so we're closer to the equator. Anyone living around the equator is not going... They'll notice the difference, but it won't be scary dramatic. But I've already noticed... I've got fruit trees on my property. They didn't fruit this year yet. So they'll all adapt. Plants and animals will adapt. They did during the medieval warming. But the cool periods are more dangerous for people. And when we had the Maunder minimum during 1645 to 1715, roughly, in the Northern Hemisphere, were the only people recording that event. There was no one in the Southern Hemisphere that we know of who was recording anything during 1645 to 1715. So the northern rivers froze. The rivers were the transport for everything. You want to get something from north to south or east to west in England, it was all done on the rivers in those days. So they couldn't get through. The ground froze. They couldn't actually plough the ground. Crops failed. People died. People literally were walking along. There's accounts in local parishes of, so let's call him Walt, is walking along and fell down dead on the spot from the cold. Just from the cold, okay, because he was a poor person who wasn't. And
we're getting slammed left, right and centre to prepare for the worst. The earth is boiling, CO2 is killing us, yet you are categorically saying that we should actually be preparing for within the next 10 to 15 years maybe.
2030 is the predicted nadir. Like, we go to the lowest point, and the prediction is it will flatten until around about 2080. So I'll be dead before we come out of it.
Time of very, very cold weather. Would that be right?
I've been preparing. And I just want to close the gap on why it's happening. So the sun has sunspots, and the solar flares come out of one sunspot into another. So each of the sunspots makes up a negative and a positive on the sun's surface. Now, the sunspot activity is so low right now that the irradiance, the percentage of irradiance that hits the Earth is less. It's already 0.22%, 0.22% less. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but if you think of the powerhouse of the sun and you dim that a little bit, that can affect things on Earth.
What would be greater, do you think? Would it be 0.04% of CO2 or 0.2% of sun activity?
Oh, by far and away. And that's now. We haven't even gone to the bottom. So Valentina predicted about at least a degree, if not 1.5 degrees drop. Now remember, that's the whole planet as an average, which includes Siberia and the poles.
That's also how they trick us with their figures, isn't it?
That's right. They trick us all the time, and they trick us with when they start measuring something and when they stop measuring something. Very, very naughty, very biased. This is definitely occurring. There is no scientist who's a scientist is even having an argument with this person about it. It's happened before. It's fitting into the Milankovitch cycles, which is around about the 450, every 450 years we get a minimum or a maximum or something like that. But it's all to do with sunspot activity.
Wow, it's painting a very interesting picture. And even, just some of from the research that I've looked at, the Paris Climate Accord that came out of London in 1992 between a world central banker and one of the biggest mining magnates in the world, a guy called Maurice Strong. So essentially they created this I guess another way to scare the population, and the amount of taxes associated. It's essentially a business model and a scam to tax us on carbon.
It is.
And it's been a very, very successful one.
Is, yeah.
Very quickly, I want you to, we've only got a few minutes left, but just mention Dr. Spock.
Oh, okay. So in the 70s, there was no mention of boiling. When I was still at uni, we were all going to freeze to death. And Dr. Spock was the front man that was used. They always have a celebrity who was shown being interviewed or videoed in cold places where it was snowing, and how this is how the Earth's going to look in 10, 20 years' time. So in early 1970s, this was all going to happen in 10, 20 years' time. And we're all being scared that we're all going to freeze. I have to say, give me the heat any day compared to the cold. Cold will kill, heat will stress, and there's ways around the heat. But cold will kill. So then it went quiet. The next thing you knew, we're all going to have an increase in climate. But they had to do that in order to tag it to pollution of some kind.
And overpopulation.
Yeah, showing the pictures of the factories, showing the air pollution, and the smog. Oh my God, we're causing a greenhouse effect, which is a total furphy. There's only one greenhouse effect. A greenhouse is a structure that lets all the light in and keeps all the water vapor in. If you shut the door.
And more than that, you're cutting off airflow.
That's right.
So if there's hot air inside, you're not going to have it mixing up with the cold air.
That's right.
So
exactly right.
Yeah,
that's why
and
it only works in a greenhouse, and the only greenhouse gas, the only true greenhouse gas, is water vapor. Carbon dioxide levels don't go up until after the temperature goes up.
It's a lag. By some people, quote 300 years. Some people quote up to 600 or 700.
600 to 800 years.
That's right.
And that's from the ice core data.
That's right.
So while I was doing my PhD, whenever I got stuck, I'd just go into the UN data and read everything I could about the so-called evidence for carbon dioxide being the cause of all these problems. And there it all was. The real honest data saying, well, that doesn't happen till about 800 years after the temperature goes up. And if you think about it, after you watch part one of our discussion, that's because the photosynthesis is able to increase, so there's more plants and therefore more moisture, etc. And then the carbon dioxide goes up, because you can actually, all living things on Earth, there's more of them, more biomass, so they're producing more respiration.
There you go, people. We've had 2 discussions. Listen to last week's one and listen to this one. Have we created enough of a case to tell you that this climate change, global warming business is absolute rubbish? Have we created a case to say that the world is not, and I say stress, not overpopulated? If you think we're wrong on any of these matters, let us know. Bring along some of the experts. I think Dr. Benn would more than happily have a conversation with anybody who is in the other camp. And I guess to finish it off, stop letting these agencies scare you. Stop letting the agencies terrify your children. They've got enough stuff going on already without these rubbish narratives. And that's part of what Karen and myself try to do, is to offer more information, offer other sides to this story. You can contact me, Dennis, at awakeninginhealth.com. That's Dennis with 2 N's. I'm happy to supply any information that Karen has to people who contact me. Thanks again to Cairns 89.1 FM for allowing us the platform to discuss these issues. And again, these are our opinions. These are not the opinions necessarily of the station. And I look forward to bringing you some more information next week. Again, Dr. Benn, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity, Dennis.
It's a wrap. Woo!